Professor, thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself?
Thank you, Josephine, for having me this morning. My name is Bernard Bashaasha. I'm a professor of agricultural economics and policy at Makerere University, College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences. That's where I work. I've been head of department, school dean, college principal, and all that. But right now, I'm just a professor teaching graduate and undergraduate students. I do research and consultancies as well.
In which areas? What's your area of significant interest?
Nutrition. I've been doing a lot of work on nutrition, but I also do impact assessment studies. So if you have a project, it's ending, you need impact, I'm there. But in general, I do a lot of other work related to agricultural economics, production economics, consumer economics, those areas.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are you seeing usually when we're having conversations around climate change, and this podcast is called Climate Talk? When we're having conversations around climate change, some of the things people are telling us is you have people saying, I've not seen the climate change. And some people are saying, if you were then with us back then, you would have noticed that there's a lot of changes. So you with your gray hair, I'm sure you've seen a lot of things. What have you seen, or have you seen anything that speaks to a changing climate?
For me, Josephine, the signs of climate change are clear. There are those things I watch. As you said, I've been around for quite some years. But they're indicators. And in the area of research, we call them shocks. But before I get to the shocks, the temperatures themselves are changing. I mean, it never used to be this hot, even during the dry season. And then the shocks I'm talking about, I've done research on climate shocks as well. Maybe that's something I should have mentioned at the beginning. So we see prolonged droughts. They are even deeper in the sense that they are drier and they are longer and they are more intense, like the one we've just gone through. I hope it has ended. Floods, we never used to have these huge floods. Perhaps that's linked to environmental degradation, but a bit of it can be traced back to climate change. So again, we have floods in areas that never used to flood, intensities that we never used to see before. We have landslides. When I was growing up, I never heard of a landslide. Maybe because people hadn't encroached on marginal, fragile lands, but that's again part of climate change. Everything probably can't be square put on climate change, but there is always a connection between climate change and those. Increased pest and disease pressure on crops. When I was growing up, again, as you said, we used to have our matoke, our cassava, our sweet potato just growing naturally. But now people are spraying beans, they spray, even I found people spraying sweet potatoes. People are spraying cassava, people are spraying maize, and you can trace back some of that increased disease, crop disease, and pest pressure, I think, to climate change. So, Josephine, there are signs that the climate is changing. There's no doubt about that.
Were you in Kampala, was it last week or a week ago?
I've been here, yes.
That rain that came and we were just seeing videos flying all over the place.
Yes, I watched that. Fortunately, that day I didn't go to town, but I mean, we lost lives, I think. I don't know how many people passed on because of that. So again, that's a sign that the rains are heavier and more intense. Of course, part of that, people are focusing on the construction in waterways and you can't dispute that. That's part of the problem. But again, when you look at the intensity, and I'm sure the climatologists could have traced the intensity of the rainfall, you find that the rains were intense, short and intense, and that means that a lot of water is being poured on the ground at the same time, and it can't just be the rate of outflow and the rate of inflow are not matching. So that's why I think you have flooding. And that's still also, I think, to be a sign of a changing climate. Also, world over, when you look at other countries, because I have friends who live abroad, they'll be telling you, like in South Korea now, those forest fires, they had never had those fires. And largely they are saying it has been very dry and drier than normal. And so a small spark just starts those fires. I think also with snowing and the amounts of snow and the timing of the snow, sometimes more heavier than normal, sometimes less than expected. So all of those, I think, are signs. So there are signs which are here with us, but there are also signs outside of where we are in the globe.
But then you still have some people saying, climate change is something we are making up.
Yes, they are there. And I do know, and some of them actually are very big people. But I think it's a matter of time. It's like we have a diffusion theory in what we teach. There are those people who believe and pick up quickly when something happens. There are those we call laggards, those who will wait and they're a little bit careful and cautious, overcautious. But eventually they also adopt. So I think the signs are not going away and climate change is not going away soon. So I think it's a matter of time that that group will join the believers as well. Even with religion, I mean, it has been over 2,000 years since Jesus Christ lived on the earth, but there are still people who are saying, no. we don't believe in that. So I think some things need time to change, and I think that will happen.
You are largely in the area of agriculture.
Correct.
So give me the relationship between climate change and agriculture.
The connections, Josephine, are quite... There are those which are clear and there are those which are subtle. But from the agriculture point of view, the issues I touched on, apparently our agriculture is rain-fed, as much of it is rain-fed, as you know. So most of the shocks I mentioned, if I can use that word, have direct and indirect impacts on agriculture. So I talked about droughts. When droughts are long and we don't have irrigation, we depend on the rain, then crops are affected. They dry and die. Even the resistant ones like bananas, which keep a lot of water, they also are affected. So productivity is affected. The same happens when you have floods, because floods also can be destructive. If you have a garden of rice or cassava and it is flooded for long, then you have the plants dying.
Are we seeing any new trends in the production, in our agriculture production, as a result of climate change?
Basically, Josephine, I think our agriculture productivity levels have been low. And there are very many factors for that. So I think climate change is just adding to the problems that already exist. And I mean, in the absence of climate change, our productivities would probably be more stable, with less noise. That's what we call variance or variability in the science language. They would be low, but you can have a parameter that is low, but also if the parameter is low and then you have more noise, more variability, then that is worse. So we want the coefficient of variation or the variance to be low. But climate change, I think, is adding to the variability in the productivity. But productivity is generally low in this country for various reasons. We use less fertilizers. The soils are depleted. They are mined because each time we are harvesting and bringing things in town and we don't get the minerals back to the farm and we don't replenish them with enough inorganic or organic fertilizers. And so there are so many other factors responsible for productivity. Productivity being low, but climate change, I think, contributes to that. But most importantly, I think climate change contributes to the variability, and that's an important element of productivity.
When you say productivity is low in this country, it goes against everything my brain tells me when I'm driving along a highway or anywhere in this country and there's a food market, there's all these markets, there's all this fresh produce. What do you mean productivity is low?
From our standpoint, Josephine, productivity being low is we have what we measure as yield gaps. By the way, the productivity I'm talking about, largely I'm talking about, because productivity can be in many dimensions. It can be output per person. It can be output per unit, land of area. It can be output per unit of capital. So I'm talking about productivity largely with regard to land. So we have what we call yield gaps. That is, we look at what we are potentially able to produce, and that is basically the production at research stations, and then we compare with what farmers get in their fields. And that difference is what we use as the yield gap. And the larger it is or the wider it is, the more intense the problem is. So when you look at most of our crops or enterprises or value chains, generally all yield gaps are huge. I have some numbers, I didn't carry them with me, but you would have a disparity of about 70% or 80%.
Could you use a specific crop to help us understand these
A
gaps?
specific crop. I think what I have seen was in fisheries, if I may deviate again.
Okay.
The discussion in agriculture tends to focus mainly on crops, but we forget the livestock bit and fisheries, which are very important elements as well. So I do know, what I remember in my mind is that I think the yield gap in fisheries production, that is aquaculture, not the catch fish, not the wild one where you go in the lake and catch, but the raised one in fish ponds and whatever, I think is about 70%. Again, these are numbers in the National Development Plan 3, the one we've just completed. They have a nice table there that shows the yield gaps, and I think I remember the fish, but there are very many other enterprises. So, but I think the issue is also with cassava, which is probably about 80% or around there, if I'm not mistaken.
What does that 80% or that 70% with fisheries mean? What does it look like? If
It
I'm
means-
just a Ugandan listening in and thinking, what's that?
It means that farmers are just producing. If it is 80% the yield gap, then it means that farmers are getting 20% of what we are getting at the research stations. So if cassava at the research station is 7 metric tons per hectare, then at the farm level, it would be just 20% of that. That's what it would mean. So yes, what you see on the street,
Along the roads?
along the road, and we buy and eat, the food is always there just because we have 70% of our population in agriculture. So they are giving us that food, yes, and that's why it is plentiful. But if we are transform and create jobs outside agriculture, such that we have more people in service and manufacturing sectors and fewer people in agriculture, then probably you wouldn't be seeing all that food. So I think what we are seeing now is being pumped up by the numbers, the number of people we have there. So that's everybody produces little, but because there are very many producers, the summation is a big volume that we see in our markets and on the roads.
They say almost every Ugandan is a farmer. Are you a farmer?
Yes, I am. I am, Josephine.
What are you seeing in your farm that is climate change affecting it in any way?
I don't do many things. I grow mangoes. And yes, I'm seeing a lot of insect pest attack that never used to be there before. And I can trace that back to the climate. Also, I think the droughts are longer than they used to be. So I have to try to do a few things, mulching and whatever, to try to conserve the moisture. So there are a few things I'm seeing, but I'm sure those who are growing many more other enterprises are probably seeing much more than I'm seeing because I'm not a pure 100% farmer.
Would you be able to help me understand how the prices of commodities are being affected?
That's an area we have not interrogated in terms of empirical work. Actually, when you look at our studies on climate change, we tend to focus on the impacts of climate change on production. And the value chain has very many levels, what we call nodes. So you have the production, and then you move up, of course, to processing, and processing can be primary or secondary, and then so many other levels of value addition. So our analysis seems to be lacking outside the farm level node of the value chain. But of course, prices play at different nodes. They are what we call farm gate prices, which pertain at the farm. And then, of course, the other prices also cascade at other levels. So probably what I can say is that my observation is that at farm gate level, prices have generally been low. And most of the studies we've done, we do see that sometimes for some commodities, farmers can't even break even. Break even, I mean the income coming out being able to cover the costs, both total and variable. And I'm using some of these terminologies loosely, but that's basically what it would mean. So I put in 20 million, then at least let me get back the 20 million. And that would include, of course, my own computation of my own labor and management time, opportunity cost of my time. So that's what we call break-even. So when we do analysis at farm level, we find that for most enterprises, farmers don't break even. They are in the negative margin. There are, however, enterprises, I think like coffee and cocoa these days, where farmers, I think, are breaking even, and there are reasons for that from the pricing point of view. But generally, to go back to your question, the prices have been generally low. And I can't pinpoint exactly what I think the impact of climate change has been. But what I could say again is that climate change could have introduced more noise, more variability. When I say noise, noise in prices, it might not make sense to some people. But I mean variability. We don't like variability in some of these variables. If the prices are 500 or 600, let them at least be 650, 580, around there. But if they dipped 400, and then one day they're up 700, that's a lot of noise. And so I think climate change, generally there are other factors responsible for the low prices, generally, low agricultural prices in this country, that make farmers not break even most of the time. But I think the impacts of climate change has been increasing the variability in those prices. And that's also not good, because that means farmers can't plan. If the prices are 500 today and tomorrow they are 700 and the other day they dipped to 300, and you can see that in many commodities, especially milk, where sometimes prices at the farm gate dropped 500, sometimes they are 2,000. So yes, climate change has affected prices, but I don't think the level of prices, the variability in prices, is where my emphasis would be.
Are we seeing it at our tables? Or is this just the farmer's problem and it has not yet trickled down?
I think we may not be seeing it at our tables just because of the nature of our production. Yeah, because this is a country where you have multiple sources. So by the time matoke reaches or maize reaches Makerere in the market, it has come from different parts. So some of the differences in price, and then you can't go to Makerere and say my maize came from Chiboga, I bought it at a higher price, so I must sell it at a higher price. It just doesn't work out. The prices in the market tend to even out. And so the losses and gains along the way are absorbed by the traders. If traders are able to buy low, they'll come to Karelwe and sell high and get the difference. But if they go an area where the prices are a little bit high and they buy high, then they sell at the Karelwe price and make a small difference. So there are different margins. We call them marketing margins between the farm and the market, which are maybe wholesale or even retail markets. So an investigation of traders would actually reveal to us what is going on. That's why we are not seeing it on the table, because the market helps us even out. The forces of demand and supply help us even out the prices. That's why we're not net seeing it, but the shocks are being absorbed by the traders and the farmers.
How bad or how good is it for the farmer?
I think instability is bad for the farmers because they can't plan. And as I mentioned, if they have a period of drought like the one we've just gone through, and productivities are low, even if the prices don't change, the revenue that comes out is just a multiplication of the price and the quantity. So even if the prices don't change, but the quantities they are selling go down because of droughts, floods, and other types of shocks, then that means the revenue inflows to the farmers are reduced, plus the quantities themselves they are left with. Because remember, farmers have needs. They have to pay school fees, they have medical things. Well, they may not have water and electricity bills like you and I, but they have other bills they have to meet. And so because of that, they may be forced to sell higher quantities of the little that they have harvested to be able to meet these other monetary demands. So that translates into malnutrition, fewer quantities of produce left at home for food. And sometimes if the production drops very badly, then even the revenues also dip very badly. And of course, their livelihoods would then be negatively affected.
And particularly, we are speaking about a smallholder farmer.
Yes, smallholder farmers, who are the majority.
Okay.
Yes.
Who are all of us. Do you think that where Uganda stands, we have the ability to affect prices in the commodity markets?
When I look, okay, when you say commodity markets, maybe we look at the three levels. There are those which are purely domestically traded, like the matoke. I don't know whether we export a lot of matoke even to the region. Then there are those regional markets. And then there are those international markets. So for international markets, in international trade, Uganda would be considered a small country case. So we are too small to influence even the price of coffee or cotton or cocoa, the products that we trade internationally. So there the answer is no. Even at regional level, I'm not sure there is a commodity we produce so much so that we are a big price influencer. So I think generally the answer is no, just because of our nature. There is no commodity that I can say, Josephine, that we produce in such large quantities that if we hoard or even put more on the market, then we'll be able to get to influence the price, the pertaining prices. I can't think of any. At least at the moment, none.
That's a little sad to hear. What are the ways that we could make ourselves more resilient to the changes in global prices in the future?
That's another interesting one, Josephine. I think we need to make ourselves climate-proof ourselves. And what do I mean there? We need to go into those enterprises that are resilient to climate change. And I think we've already identified some of them, like coffee, cocoa, apparently some value chains of livestock, especially actually our local breeds of livestock. The way we produce coffee and cocoa in this, it's not a pure stand like they do in Brazil and maybe Vietnam and other Arabica coffee producers. Much of ours here tends to be intercropped with trees and bananas, as you know, the system. And that kind of system tends to be climate proof, climate resistant, because there are some, I think, ways and means of how that kind of system resists the intense either flooding or heat. So those are the enterprises we need to focus on and identify, focus on and support. And as I said, coffee is one of them, cocoa is one of them, and I think livestock, some livestock value chains. I can't pin down exact ones beyond the local breeds of livestock. So that's one way. I think the second way would be for us to undertake some investments that tend to minimize the impact of those shocks. Like drought, I think irrigation would be a good approach. Dams and increasing the access to water. Getting involved in pasture production. You know, most of the time in Uganda, we take pasture for granted. Yeah. It's like the grass has to grow and we feed the cows. But that's no longer the case. The time is coming when pasture is going to be like your maize garden. You look after it. You grow it, you fertilize it, you look for good seeds of pasture. Not that you expect any grass to grow and then the cows will go and eat. So we need improved pasture management systems. We need irrigation. We need water for livestock. And also we need to work on our soils, soil improvement. I think we can't continue running away from fertilizer use forever. It's just not going to happen.
And soil testing.
When we have and when we have a population growth rate of about 3%, and the growth in agriculture is about 1.3%. You can see that you can't go far with those numbers. So we have to look for ways of, actually, as you said, testing, knowing our soils very well, and then putting the right nutrients so that then nutrient recycling. And when we say replace nutrients, we have to think about both inorganic and organic ways of doing that. But there's also an area that I think has not been very well recognized. The agronomy at the farm is very important. You see, I told you of those yield gaps. If it is soybean and you are told this is the number of plants you need to have per acre, farmers should be taught on exactly having those number of plants. Because if you have more than those, then they are going to outcompete each other. If they say you weed after 1 month, farmers need to know that you weed after 1 month. If we say you weed 2 times, you must weed 2 times. Because if you get a very, very good seed, the genes are very important in all this, what we are talking about. But then the genes have to be managed the way they are supposed to be managed for us to realize the levels of output that we anticipate. But if you take good genes and mismanage them, you'll not be able to get what is expected of those good genes.
And you might manage them well, get what's expected, but what happens after harvest?
Usually, if the output is good, even if the price is low, you will at least get something.
Post-harvest handling.
Post-harvest handling is a big issue because for some commodities, especially the perishables like tomatoes and whatever, I understand we lose about 40%. So that's an area, Joseph, and thank you for raising that. It's another area where we need to intervene. So we need to enhance water management, increase pasture production systems,
soil,
improve our agronomy, work on the soil, work on reducing post-harvest losses, and then I think we would be halfway the journey, not full.
Would an information gap be something we need to work on? From our extension workers to just basically how information trickles down to who you say and who we think is the person that's constantly in the field, the smallholder farmer?
Extension, Josephine, is still weak. And everybody will tell you that. Because I think we are supposed to have a number of extension workers per some good number of farmers. One extension worker should serve. I don't want to give you the numbers because I don't think I have the right numbers in my head. But right now, one extension worker in Uganda serves very many farmers. So one extension worker actually is supposed to reach twice, if not thrice, the recommended number of farmers. So the intensity of extension is weak. That's one point. Secondly, the extension staff are telling us they are not facilitated. They are given an office and a salary, but they are not given funds for transport or maybe motorcycles to be able to reach the farmers. Actually, recently somebody suggested at a workshop I attended that we need to give them bicycles. But I'm not sure whether the students I teach at Makerere and they graduate, I don't know whether they are going to the sub-county and riding a bicycle. That is debatable. Maybe if it's a motorized bicycle. But the decentralization of extension, I think, had implications on that. Because some of these operational funds, as they call them, are supposed to come from the local government. And the local government budgets are thin because we have too many districts, as you know. So their priorities tend to be administrative. You first have to fuel the cow's vehicle and pay the cow's driver and the allowance before you get money for an extension staff. So we have extension people, the single spine. I don't know whether you know what that means. Yeah. We used to have these NADs and arrangement where the extension was supposed to be government funded and privately delivered. But that was changed back to the old system, which we call the single spine, where everything just emanates from the Ministry of Agriculture and that cascades down to the local government. And then, so the extension system is managed as one unit. So that change, I think, somehow increased the number of extension staff. But as I said, the operational resources still remain a problem. So we have to find ways and means. We had a meeting recently where SPEAR is a standing panel on impact assessment, which is looking at what the CGIAR is doing. I don't know whether, again, you know, Joseph, you know what the CGIAR is.
This is a no acronyms.
And the consultative group for international agricultural research, the SIPS, International Potato Center, IITS. But anyway, SPEAR is looking at the impact of what their work has been. And recently, at a report that was presented, I think we saw that, is it about 15 or 16%, again, I don't remember, of the farmers are being reached by the technologies that are being generated. So that rings a bell in terms of what is going on. So that means a lot of research is being done, but little of it is being used. And some of the issues people are talking about that were, of course, facilitating extension staff. But I'm also looking at the option of encouraging the international community to get interested in extension and advisory services. Because right now we have the CGIAR. The CGIAR only does research. And somehow they expect the national systems to transfer that research to the farmers, and it's not happening. So I'm a proponent or a proposer that probably the international community, I hate to say this, that we always ask the international community to step in when there are gaps. But that's a gap, I think, which maybe another international consortium could be arranged to make sure that at least now the technologies that are available are enabled to move to the farmers.
What can we do ourselves?
A lot.
Looking at what's happening with the international community right now.
Yes, the international community, of course, has been shocked by some of the recent changes. But there is a lot we can do on our own, I think. I hate to say this, but it's the truth. The budget for agriculture, I think, from the Treasury has been a bit low. So I think that can be increased a little bit. And some of the increase could be targeting extension and advisory services to get the technology to the farmers. We can also improve our work ethics and love this country a little bit more. And at the local government, also the priorities. I'm looking at, there used to be a model of conditional grants rather than non-conditional from the Treasury. So I think some resources could be conditionally released from the Treasury and directed at the local government, purposely targeting a extension delivery and advisory services, such that even if the cow doesn't have fuel, that budget can't be touched because it's conditional on that kind of thing. And so there are a number of things we can do: improving infrastructure on the ground, expanding soil testing services, and maybe having the National Agriculture Research Organization also move a little bit away from the office and the laboratories to the field a little bit more. I know they are doing some bit of on-farm research, but probably that's an area where the National Agriculture Research Organization could also take an extra step, and because there is a failure there, and once there is a failure, some type of intervention might make sense than no intervention at all.
I've seen agribusinesses do their own extension, because they see the value in it. Can we have more? Because if we put all of this on the government, we've seen what happens when we do that.
Extension is a public good, and private people have trouble investing in public goods. But yes, I know the sugarcane people are doing that, but because they are the sole buyers, and I know the people in the tea are also doing that, but they tend to be the sole buyers. So if an extension person can control the supply chain, such that I don't pay for research for tea, and then you sell it to another person, then that can work. I would say, Josephine, the private businesses can complement, but it's a public good. I think we need more public engagement in that area for us to make some good headway. That's my take.
Okay. Do you follow the prices of staple foods regularly?
Not that much really, but I'm aware from my standpoint, being a consumer, but also being at the university. So it's not that one of the areas I have done research in. So I couldn't tell you with good confidence, with the empirical backing, that I know what is happening. But yes, I'm aware of what's happening generally, like a good citizen.
Do you have a reliable source for where we can get this kind of information?
Josephine, agriculture statistics have been a problem in this country, and sometimes we fear saying it loudly, but that is the fact. Because before even you got prices, even production information at the farm level is a problem. The way this information was supposed to be collected is supposed to be collected by the extension staff, whom I have already told you are incapacitated. But then the Minister of Agriculture is expecting these numbers. So I don't want to say this, but I think somehow the extension staff have to estimate these numbers and deliver them. And these are the numbers that cascade and end up with the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, FAOStat. FAOStat has a huge FAO statistics base. So agriculture statistics have been a problem. I know UBOS, the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, has attempted to intervene, but the interventions have been sporadic, not consistent. So leaving farm prices and farm information alone, the food price information in the markets and beyond is also a big problem. And that's not an area where we have engaged a lot. And the reasons are various. Well, I have to tell you this, Josephine, because most of the research we do is donor funded. And the donors tend to fund research at the production level, because most donors, whether Bill and Melinda Gates, whether USAID, when it was still very active, think our problem is at production. But there are issues outside of production that we've not really addressed, and price information is one of those areas we have not been addressed. So, no, I don't have a reliable source of food price or commodity price information. Although occasionally students go and do these quick market surveys and come up with pieces of information, but this would be cross-sectional at a certain point in time. But consistently, across markets, cross-sectionally, and across time, we don't have that. We used to rely on FuseNet. FuseNet was, I think, a project supported by USAID. But the rumor I hear is that the funding has also been affected, so I think FuseNet has closed. or at least is limping.
Yeah.
And that is definitely making a bad situation worse.
Do you think that we've even started to see the impact of what's happening with the Trump order? Do you think we've seen the impact of it on agriculture? Also considering what we're talking about, the impacts of climate change on the sector?
I think the impact of what is happening, Josephine, if you listen to the news, people are emphasizing more of what is happening in the health sector. HIV/AIDS patients and those who are on some other forms of health care support. But USAID was also big in agriculture.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised nobody is saying a thing loudly about the impacts on agriculture. So my take is that we haven't yet seen the impact. The impacts on health are immediate because these are patients, and if they don't have the medicine, then the impact is seen. But I think the impacts on agriculture are going to be gradual, but probably they will be more devastating, if not equally devastating, as the impacts we are seeing in the other sectors. There have been many USAID-funded programs and projects in the agriculture sector impacting various value chains, even at different levels of the value chain. So I don't think we have seen the impacts yet, and I don't know how the impacts will unravel, but they will be there. They're down coming. The road. Yes.
My final question to you: If you had all the power, if you had a magic wand, what would you do different to support our agriculture sector? Thinking about climate change 10 years from now, 20 years from now.
Again, my answer is going to be a little bit unpalatable to some of your listeners, but I have been places, as I mentioned at the beginning of our talk, maybe before we were on the air. I was in South Korea for 3 years as a young man, and I happened to work on their cooperative system, agriculture cooperative system, which is very huge. I spent 5 years in the US while I was doing my PhD studies, Ohio, which is agricultural. And I have been all over places. Agriculture needs support. I know we are in a free, we liberalized, but very few countries liberalize, including their agriculture. So there is in most of the countries I know of that have succeeded in agriculture, there is a lot of public support for agriculture. And I don't think we have enough public support in this country. I have said this and it has put me in trouble in some places, but we need cooperatives back. I told you about the situation in Korea. They have what they call Nonghyop. Nonghyop is the Korean cooperative organization. They are in everything. They are massive. They are in petrol stations. They are in banking. They are in what? These are farmers. Getting money from farmers. They support their farmers and they invest the money in all these areas and the proceeds go back to farmers. They give loans to farmers. So if we strengthen the cooperatives, I think the government wouldn't need even to look for these other interventions like the SCF, the Agriculture Credit Facility. I hope you know about that, Josephine, the central bank that is trying to give subsidized loans to farmers. Farmers would do it themselves through a cooperative arrangement. So I think we need institutional reforms in the agriculture sector and more public funding. That's what I would do if I was, if I had the authority.
And just very briefly, because cooperatives, there are a lot of people who have never seen what a cooperative can do. What would a cooperative help?
Cooperatives would help, first of all, increase the overriding purpose of cooperatives is to empower the farmers. So they would empower them both in backward and forward linkages. And when I say backward linkages, cooperative will work together to acquire inputs at a cheaper price. Cooperative will work together to hire extension staff, hire and fire them if they don't deliver. And they would help deal with some of these problems we are talking about. And then also when I say now Forward, I'm talking about marketing. Aggregate, commodities, quality, help with managing the post-harvest losses we are talking about, help with identifying markets, help with storage, because some of where we are let down is storage.
Yeah.
We don't hoard, not hoarding. Hoarding is the wrong word. We used to have silos, and cooperatives can have silos, such that if there is too much maize production, rather than dumping it on the market, demand and supply dictates that if supply increases, I am going to say this, ceteris paribus, other things remaining constant, then the prices would fall. So cooperatives would have that means of storing a buffer stock. You know these things, Josephine. Buffer stock, yes. So cooperatives would empower farmers and empower them for what? To improve their lives, manage their agriculture on their own, take matters in their hands.
So we're basically saying empower the smallholder farmer.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Cooperatives would. And you know, they cascade from primary, secondary, tertiary, and all the way. Yeah, the models are known. When I was growing up, they were there. Maybe when you were growing up, they were already suffering, but
they were suffering. Yes.
But
they were closing.
Yes. But I also spent some time in the Netherlands. I spent 6 months there. And the program I was doing, they attached me to the dairy subsector. And I saw how their dairy work because I was actually traveling with the driver in a truck collecting milk. That was a cooperative. The cooperative collects milk from their farmers. We never met even one single farmer. We would just go to the farm and we have the codes. We punch them in. We collect the milk. We record the quality and everything. We leave everything there. We take the milk to the factory and the farmer gets a check. That's the cooperative. The government is not involved. It's a cooperative that is doing all of that. And then they have their outlets, supermarkets where they are selling their dairy products and everything. Cooperatives work, Josephine. And we know it. And even the big people know it.
Thank you very much, Professor.
You are welcome.
I don't want to make the comment that I was going to make.